If you think it doesn't make sense, remember it does. We're just not seeing it yet because we're not asking the right questions. Are what we're witnessing grounded and rooted in reality, and everything has a logical scientific reasoning behind it, or are we dealing with supernatural beliefs or supernatural entities? As it is time for us to discuss and break down Episode 2, Part 2 of True Detective Night Country. It is December 21st, the fourth day of night. After discovering the missing scientists last week, we immediately start with seeing the conditions their bodies are in. They're all completely nude, some of their corneas are burnt, their eardrums are ruptured, and some have appeared to have bitten some of their own fingers. Whether they did this to themselves or someone did this to them, this is a brutal and horrific way to die. Now, may I remind you all, doesn't this look and feel familiar? Remember the drawing from Darwin in episode 1 of the town's legends with the eyes and fingers missing too? I don't think this is a coincidence. But maybe the most important thing about this horrific discovery is the spiral marking left on Lund's head. Now, you all will remember he is the founder and director of the research station. Does that mean anything that the head of the research station is the only one with this marking? Could it be a sign of protection, or maybe this can lead to resurrection? Now, Liz knows this will ultimately be a shit bowl, as she calls it, no answers and a bunch of angry people, but on top of that, their department doesn't even have a forensic technician. Now, I forgot to mention this in last week's video, but did you all notice the logo on their uniforms is the polar bear? Now, while we didn't see the polar bear in this episode, there are some Easter eggs that I'll point out later, but I think the polar bear will play a very key role in the rest of this show. Now, Liz mentions how sending this case to the largest city in Alaska, Anchorage, would probably be the best thing for them, which one would assume that they are more equipped to handle these type of cases, but she immediately changes her mind. Now, we can see just how unprofessional or how unprepared or just not how used these type of cases are to this department, as one of them gets the chainsaw going and one of Liz's men takes a selfie with the deceased. Now, Hank says they're just blowing off steam, and personally, I don't think taking a photo with finding bodies like this is the best way to do that, but this to me speaks to a larger concern that I have not only with this police department, but Hank in particular, and what he may have covered up at some point. Now, I want you all to remember this for later. As Liz puts her foot down and reminds them that this is an active crime scene and to at least pretend to know what they're doing. Meanwhile, Navarro looks on from the distance as Rose suggests that she go home and leave this for someone else, as she responds by letting her know that she believes and she knows that this is tied to Annie. And Rose knows that just like Annie, this case may have a similar outcome, which is no answers. Well, at least for now, as Rose invites her over for later. Now, did you all notice the whispers as Rose walked away from Navarro? Now, I'm starting to believe that Navarro, seeing that polar bear last week and the flashback of her friend with the half-blown face off and what happens later in this episode with her finding the necklace, is it safe to assume that Navarro shares the same gift or curse that her sister and her mother had by being able to communicate with the dead, and she's just choosing to ignore it? As we see Navarro stepping back, she discovers clothes and shoes neatly folded and lined up in a very particular way. I'm starting to think that the scientists had an audience witness their murder, or some might call it a ritual. As Liz seems to have her officers behave, one of them accidentally breaks off Lund's arm, and out of nowhere he screams in pain and he's alive. Now, I wouldn't categorize this as a jump scare per se, but I would be lying if I didn't admit that was creepy as hell. Now, again, I want to point out that was Lars' arm, who again had the spiral on his head, so maybe he'll have answers, but again, did that spiral keep him alive? Now, last week I pointed out that the opening credits have Easter eggs that might point towards answers of this show, and if you'll notice, this week's ending shot has a very different ending than last week's, as we see the inside of Clark's trailer where he had what seemed to be a shrine of Annie. So moving forward, we should keep an eye out for these opening credits because they might have more Easter eggs and also gives us a clue of what to expect in the episode. Now, Liz finds out that her lone survivor won't be able to talk to after having his leg amputated and until he's out of his induced coma. As Liz pays a visit to the local school to speak with one of the teachers by the name of Reis about what he knows about what they did at the station. Now we find out that Liz and him had a sexual history together, or as Liz calls it, desperate times. Bryce tells her that the scientists were very committed. No one came in, no one came out. They worked for decades trying to discover an extinct microorganism cure that could stop cellular decay. In layman terms, this can cure cancer, autoimmune diseases, genetic disorders. This would be, as Bryce called it, a game changer. Now Liz questions why it took them so long, but Bryce reminds her that this just wasn't a walk in the park, and many things could have happened that caused their research to fail. Now he personally didn't believe that they were never going to be able to find what they were working for, but I personally have a theory that maybe they did have a breakthrough, or at least Clark did, and he found what they were looking for. As Liz gets a call from Lulu to head back to the station. But the question that was left on everyone's mind last week and wondering if there were major connections between season 1 and season 4 is finally revealed. Now we catch up with Rose and Navarro as she wonders how long Rose has been speaking and seeing Travis. As Rose tells her that he only comes when he wants something, as we get the backstory. Before taking his own life by going into the ice, Rose and him shared a moment that was a goodbye for him without her knowing. Now he had leukemia but wanted to go out on his own terms. Their last moments together involved homemade croissants, a song, and lovemaking as he took it all in before he left her. Now for those who haven't seen season 1, this might not mean much for you all, but for those like myself who not only seen season 1 but also loved it, this moment is pretty significant and can lead to one of two things. Now, Navarro was the one to find Travis, which is a theme so far this show that she tends to find dead people, but Rose says to her this was
one last gift from Travis Cole.
There it is. This is 100% confirming that Travis was indeed the father of Russ Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey from season 1. Now, I don't want to make this a huge deal because I think this might just be a smile back at the fans, but I do want to fill those in who are unfamiliar with this connection or for those that don't necessarily remember. Now, here's what we know from Russ' dad based on the little that was shared during season 1. Now, Russ's parents met in Texas. When his father returned from fighting from Vietnam, his mother left the family, so we can call Rose maybe his stepmom. Now, Travis and his son Russ moved to Alaska and had what, according to Russ, was a tense but working relationship. Now, Russ said that his father was disappointed that he left for Texas as an adult, and he really didn't confirm what actually happened to his dad, besides that he died of leukemia, which again was confirmed at the scene. But we also know that he lived the rest of his life off the grid. Well, now we know that he lived the rest of his life with his love, Rose. Now, showrunner Issa López confirmed during an appearance of the Watch podcast that this season is in conversation with past seasons, revealing that the spiral from season 1 would appear in this season, which we know from episode 1, and now in this episode. Now again, this is very fun. This is an exciting way for fans like myself to get happy, but I don't think it means that Russ will be playing a role in this season or making a cameo, and honestly, the timelines don't really add up considering that Russ talking about his father took place in 2012, and this particular season is taking place in current times. But then again, the flashback that we saw between Rose and Travis could have been years ago. But I do want to share with you all this audio from a clip of Jodie Foster on Jimmy Kimmel's show about a week ago talking about this show and Matthew McConaughey's involvement.
Come back. I saw it last night. I love this series, and
It's wonderful.
I know Matthew McConaughey is still an executive producer on the show.
He is, because he's in there somewhere in the mix.
Okay. All right. Very good.
So the question I have for you all, was this moment just fun for the audience, or will Russ Cole make a return? Now back to the actual scene. This is a very important and key line from Rose. Now, Navarro asks about Rose first seeing the dead, and it began with Travis, but she believes it has to do with where Ennis is. She believes that the world is getting old, and Ennis is where the fabric of all things are coming apart from the seams. Now, Rose isn't afraid of communicating with the dead, as she says that some of them visit just because they miss the living, some visit to tell you something that you need to hear, and some just want to take you with them, and knowing the difference is important. Now again, Navarro's unexplained experiences so far that we've seen, I personally believe that the dead is trying to talk to her, trying to communicate with her, and trying to help her with this case. As Navarro talks about Jules and how she sees people following her and has difficulty sleeping, and that the breakdown she's having is involving hearing their dead mother. Now Navarro brought her sister to Ennis to keep her close, but after what Rose said, maybe her being here is amplifying her abilities. But going back to the importance of Rose saying, don't confuse the spirit world with mental issues, that right there tells me what's going to separate this season from the rest, as it pertains to the handling of the supernatural, particularly with Season 1 and Season 3 of True Detective. Now, Season 3 hinted at the supernatural, but ended up being a little bit more grounded and logical. But Season 1, in my opinion, really played with the supernatural elements for a lot of the show, but presented it in a way where the supernatural was kind of a result of Russ being a drug addict. But everything with the Yellow King and the cult and their sacrifices still makes me question that. But neither here nor there, this line that Rose says makes me believe that yes, characters like Liz will have a difficult time believing in the supernatural, but having her son Holden touch her last week and the things that I believe she'll probably see moving forward, she'll probably become a believer, and I do feel as though the supernatural being involved in this case will be more definitive. Now, as Navarro leaves Rose, they mention the lighthouse being a place that can help her sister during these mental health issues, but then we have Rose bringing up the spiral found on Lund's head, and she draws it out in the snow, and the symbol is something that Navarro has seen years ago. As Rose tells her that she believes that this is super old, maybe older than the town, even older than the ice. Now, Navarro having seen this could be from Annie's tattoo that we'll talk about later, or did Navarro see this elsewhere? Now, to spotlight this spiral and what it can mean and in relations to Season 1 of True Detective. Now, the spiral was closely associated with the Yellow King, a mysterious and seemingly cosmic entity that motivated ritual assaults and murders. Now, spoiler for Season 1, our heroes do find the killer, but the details of the Yellow King remained a mystery. So again, the question being, is this at all attached to the murders of Season 1 of True Detective, and is Ennis where the spiral originated from? Back at the station, Liz sees that they have a visitor, and it is her boss, Captain Connelly. Now, he wants the case to go to Anchorage, but Liz refuses, and we see Connelly insist and calls a chopper to get the bodies. Now, she fills him in on the regulations and lets him know that the bodies can't go anywhere until they're thawed out, which takes 48 hours. But the question is, where will Liz keep the bodies? As we cut to the local ice rink where Liz comes up with the ideas of where to keep the bodies, which is at this rink, but first she must get the permission from the character that we heard about last week, and that is Kate, who we know Navarro got into it with, and as I speculated, it sounded like Kate is someone that you don't want to piss off because she seems to be a very important figure and might indeed have ties to this actual Annie case. Now, I want to spotlight this interaction between Kate and, as she calls him, Henry and not Hank. She asks how Pete is doing and that he should do private skating coaching for her boys, and Hank says to her that he'll try to talk some sense into him. As she tells him she's counting on him to do that. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, that's a nothing burger, we shouldn't pay too much attention to that interaction, but I disagree. Remember last week it was said and it was shown to us that Hank had the case files of Annie, and remember I said that there was something suspicious about him? So my working theory right now, especially after this interaction and something that happens later in this episode, what if Kate, the owner of the rink and the mines, is very much aware of what happened to Annie and has some, if not most of the police department, including Hank, in her pocket, and covered up Annie's case and wants Peter out of the police department because he has a moral compass and he would probably tell the truth of what happened and call out the corruption within the department. I know that's a bit much, but let me know if you all feel a similar type of connection with Kate. Now, to add more fuel to the suspicions of Kate, she agrees to allow Liz to bring the bodies into the rink, and she says to her she's only doing this.
Just so we're clear, I'm doing this because I love this town.
So again, I believe that Kate had Annie killed because she loves her town. Annie was beginning to destroy this town by all of her protesting with the mines, and as we know from what Ryan said last week, if you shut down the mines, you shut down the town, so Kate took it upon herself to shut down Annie. Now, as the bodies arrive, we see Peter notices the self-inflicted bite marks as Liz wants him to look into the files to find any similarities in past autopsies, as they now have a count of 5 heads out of the 8, with 1 being in the hospital and the 2 remaining believed to be buried. Now, Navarro arrives on the scene and shows Liz the symbol found on Lund's head is the exact same one that Annie had as a tattoo. Now, Liz plays it off like there's no connection and laughs at her and tells her that she doesn't want to work with her ever again and has her leave the scene, but immediately calls Peter over to look into this as he comes up with the idea of unlocking one of the scientist's phones with face recognition. Back at Havoc's bar, Navarro shows Ryan a picture of Clark and he's never seen him before. But this new character by the name of Chuck comes outside and interrupts them because he's pissed that she's bringing up Annie again, which we know minors and Annies is a very sensitive topic for a lot of these minors. Now, just like Liz, Navarro picks up on everything. She notices how Chuck looked at the picture and pays him a visit a little bit later in this episode. Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but is anyone else getting the feeling out there that Ryan might know exactly what happened to his sister Annie? But he's deciding to keep quiet because he doesn't want to lose his job. As we saw last week, he has a kid and he is probably sharing custody, and maybe he needs his job more than anything and he's willing to keep quiet about his sister's death so he can keep his son. Now, back inside the bar, this fight breaks out as tensions are high because some of the townspeople are upset about the water supply being bad because of the mines. Now, that cult in season 1 worshipped and believed in the Yellow King and that making sacrifices would get them closer to them. Are we maybe making a correlation that people in the mines had to make sacrifices by poisoning the water and making sacrifices to the children and Annie to get closer to their king? Back at the rink with Liz and Peter, this might be my favorite scene of this episode, as they point out that the prints on the shoes had no matches, and Liz's working theories are that the sudden drop of the pressure can cause the rupture of the eardrums and the damaging of the soft tissue, and that the hypothermia can cause the irrational behavior, but why drop everything and run out in the first place? Now, Peter suggests that they saw Polar Bear. In a panic, he says they ran out, they were undressed. As we see Liz says, we'll start asking the questions. He continues, who drew the sign on Lund's head? Which she says was the wrong question. Then he brings up, when was it drawn? If it was before, it could have been some type of game or ritual they played, but after, maybe someone was on the ice with them, and they mentioned the clothes being folded wasn't them, but maybe
a killer.
I really enjoyed this scene. This to me is like the classic moments in a murder mysteries that I love to see. Seeing two people trying to figure things out is so important to me in these type of narratives. But as it pertains to the show, to me, this just shows how good Liz is at her job. But also seeing Peter being really good and figuring things out and trying to figure out the unexplainable. This bond between them is really working for me so far. But the question is, will it continue to work? Who's going to mess up first? Will it be Liz? Will it be Peter? Also, her taking him under her wing to me looks like her positioning him to be like a replacement at some point. But again, I feel like this is the only officer that she can trust in her department. As we see Peter showing Liz the video that we saw from last week's episode of when Clark was caught on camera, but this time from the phone's POV, and whatever happened ended up cutting off the power to the cell phone. As we cut back to Havoc's bar, there's a conversation between him and Navarro as he lets her know that he's hearing that there's maybe protesting coming soon in the town because of the whole water situation being black in some homes. Now, going back to what I mentioned about the supernatural and Kate and the mines being involved, going back to this spiritual side of everything and being able to communicate with the dead, what if this spiritual, whatever this legend is of the town, is trying to warn the people by telling them that there's something evil going on at the mines? Now, there might be a possible foreshadowing going on in this scene as he makes a slick remark about his female dog playing tough, but really is a softie inside like Navarro. But the line she says to him about his dogs eating him one day. Now, like the caribou jumping off the cliff in episode 1, could something happen where the dogs are triggered and they end up eating their owners? Let me know if you all are thinking the same in the comments below. As Liz and Peter go to question the supplier and the cleaners at the research station, one of them, after seeing the symbol, calls it witchcraft, not a cult. As it's also brought up that Annie was a midwife. Now, this might be another one of my crazy theories, but what if Annie was caring for a baby that Clark and the scientists found during their research, and maybe, just maybe, there's some connections to the town's legend? But I want you all to put a pin in this because we're going to bring this back towards the end of this breakdown. Now, some of them saw Clark acting weird and crying in his lone room. Now, as Peter is questioning the supplier, he learns that Clark once walked around nude and he saw that symbol as a tattoo on his chest. Again, I said the polar bear wasn't seen in this episode in the physical form, but as you'll see in this scene, there's the polar bear on the wall. As the supplier reveals to Peter that he thought that he saw someone that night, but wasn't entirely sure because this is Ennis, and people of Ennis see dead people all the time. And I love this line here.
You grew up here. You know this. You see people who are gone sometimes. It's a long fucking night. Even the dead get bored.
Again, the show wants us to keep questioning the believability of what's real, what's made up, or what's superstition, what's a part of the town's legend. And of course, these people are maybe sleepless with these endless nights. So I love the back and forth of what's real and what's not. Now, Navarro ends up getting the location of Chuck to question him, but on her way there, she experiences something kind of weird. Now, as the Spice Girls play on the radio, she accidentally drops her phone and she reaches for it and she discovers a necklace, and not just any necklace, as we quickly cut to this scene which appears to be the younger Navarro and her young sister Jules being afraid of their mother, who appears to be having one of her mental breakdowns. But you'll notice she's wearing the same necklace. As Navarro throws it out of the window, was that a sign from her dead mother? As Rose said, they want to warn you, they miss you, or they want to take you with them. Now, was this even real? Because again, last week she saw that polar bear in the middle of the road. I'm personally believing that she is getting signs from her mother and she's just too afraid to listen. Now, Navarro questions Chuck and finds out that Clark did purchase a trailer from his cousin for this unreasonable price, all cash. Now, this was 7 years ago, a year before Annie's death. Now, I thought it was very interesting that Chuck mentioned that his cousin died of bone cancer and that Travis was diagnosed with leukemia and the scientists were trying to discover a cure for cancer. This can't all be a coincidence. Now, this was a quick scene, but I'm very curious of where this subplot is going, and that is involving Hank having this scene exchanging sweet nothings to his soon-to-be wife, who should be arriving soon, as she brings up that her mother's sick, and of course, he's sending her money. Now, could this all be a spam? Will she actually arrive? Will they get married? What will come of this plot? Is it significance of what's going on? Let me know what you all are thinking about in the comments below. Now, as his soon-to-be wife requests pictures of him, he notices that Peter took Annie's case file. As Peter fills Liz in on the question I had last week, besides the non-governmental organization, who else is paying for that lab? Well, we learned that it's a shell company, NC Global Strategies, a company that has their hands in everything. Now, remember what they did at the research facility was finding a cure for all the major diseases, which to me would sound like something a company like that would be very interested in. Now, it seems like this was pointless information, at least from Liz's perspective, but again, going back to my suspicions of Kate and the mines and the sacrifices. What if this company is in line with the cult from season 1, who were known as important figures that were attached to very important people? Is it all connected? As Liz makes Pete stay and watch over the bodies, as we see an upset Kayla as Liz comes to pick up Leah. Now, we see Liz is pissed to see that Leah has allowed Kayla's grandmother to draw on her face, a drawing attached to their heritage. Now, I'm not too entirely sure why Liz was so upset. Is she afraid that once she gets closer to her heritage, she'll want to leave her? Or maybe she thinks and maybe knows that there are some people in this town that are prejudiced against the natives, and she doesn't want to what happened to Annie happen to her. As we get this quick character moment that might seem insignificant now, but I think will have a big payoff at the end, and that is we see Navarro suggesting to Jules that she go to the lighthouse, but Jules disagrees and she wants to be treated normally and promises that she will not be their mother. Now, I can see her having some type of breakdown later in the season and it getting worse, or maybe she will be able to communicate with the dead and maybe even talk to the scientists and figure out a way to help out this case. As we continue to get these little character moments, we see Leah in her room who kept a drawing on her face and she sneaks out to visit her girlfriend. Now, I can see this kind of subplot involving her getting connected to her heritage and her girlfriend, maybe playing out in a way where her and Liz have a falling out because she probably is going to be involved with the potential protesting, which we know Liz doesn't want that because we know that the people in town, what they did with the last person that protest. So I can see that plot being something we should keep an eye out for moving forward. Now, Liz is starting to put up the Christmas tree and finds the bear that we saw last week in the box, which means that that was a dream, that bear wasn't in the room. But we cut to this flashback of her and her son Holden with that same bear, and the bear has 2 eyes. Now, it's important to point out that the song playing in this scene is the same song playing on the television in last week's episode, which we know she was upset about. It was a song about the Beatles. Now, remember I said that this might be a triggering moment for her. She doesn't just hate the Beatles. This moment leads to something which appears to be evident in this scene, in this moment. Maybe this was the day that Holden died. Now, I thought that maybe Holden was involved in a car accident, which still might be the case, but what if it was more disturbing? What if Holden was attacked by a polar bear and was killed by that bear, but Liz was able to shoot the bear in the eye, but it was too late, and that's how Holden died? Now, back with Peter, his dad pays him a visit as he slaps him for taking the files. He says that even their mother didn't steal when she left them, and tells him that Liz doesn't own him and he's got a family and blood is blood and he should remember that. Now, what does that line mean for the future? Will Will have to decide between his dad and Liz? And will we ever see his mom again? Now, speaking of Liz, she pays a visit to her captain, and this visit leads to them having sex as they have a little bit of pillow talk going on and them saying that this is the last time they'll be doing this, which, by the way, they've been doing this for over 19 years, and it also appears that Liz had an affair with him. As they discuss why she wants to keep the case as a way of getting back at him, and again, I think he wants her off of this case because she'll figure out things and how it's connected to Annie, which again ties back to Kate, as he makes a slight threat towards Liz, which forces her to leave. Now, back at the station, Liz contacts a tattoo artist that gave Clark the symbol, and she discovers where he got the inspiration from, and it was Annie. As she heads over to Navarro's station, she shows her the tattoo was done 4 days after Annie's death. And just in case you wanted to know what year this show is taking place, you can see it right here. It's in 2023. As we also learned that the tongue from last week was indeed Annie's, as it is official that Liz and Navarro will work together again, but there is a mention of someone by the name of Wheeler, a topic that Liz doesn't want to discuss. Who's Wheeler and what did they do to him? Now, I might be wrong, but if we take a look at this screenshot here, this is from the actual main trailer of the show, and it appears that this gentleman might have killed this woman, and where my mind is that this is probably Wheeler, and maybe he attacked Liz or Navarro, and one of them shot him, and maybe they got rid of the body and they didn't file it. Just another example of all the secrets that this town keeps. As we end this episode, I thought this was a very interesting Easter egg. You all will notice that it says Blue King. Is that a reference to the Yellow King? As Leah and Peter talk about old times, Hank used to play the guitar and seemed like a pretty chill guy, and Peter mentions that he wants to be nothing like his father growing up and wants to be a better dad than his father. Leah talks about the story of how Liz and her dad had good times back in the day, and the theme to me in this scene was, and the focus of the scene is, not being their parents and being good enough seemed to be something to focus on. So again, this episode had a lot of great character moments, and this being one of them. Now, after Navarro scared the hell out of Havoc, they start to share pancakes and have a conversation. She shares with him that she can't believe how Annie was able to keep the relationship with Clark a secret, but she uses Liz's method of asking the right questions as she realizes that Clark got the trailer to keep their secret private, and she heads over to the Nook, which is a place to keep secrets. We see Liz going through Clark's notes, and she finds this circular drawing and all these crazy notes from, "Oh God, never say her name. I can hear her name. Her fingers are cold and dark. Her eyes are dark." More of these notes, her faces and hearing her. So it's clearly that he was losing his mind. The question is, was this immediately after losing Annie, and has he been doing this for the past 6 years? And the bigger question is, did he find a way to bring Annie back? As Liz gets a call from Navarro and they look inside to find some very interesting things in this trailer. As they find animal bones on the table and they suggest that it probably is the bones of a caribou, I'm starting to think, are these the bones of the caribou that we saw jumping off the cliff last week? Does it have anything to do with bringing her back? As they continue to look around, they find drawings all over the place, as they also find Annie's phone. And lastly, they see this small body made up of different clothing materials in the symbol of the spiral on the ceiling. As we see Annie's pictures is above this body. Remember me mentioning that Annie was a midwife? Maybe this figure was created by Clark, and this person he was referring to being alive is not Annie, but something that they created out of witchcraft. As Peter calls Liz because there's a problem at the rink, there's only 6 scientists, and we know that one of them's at the hospital, which means that Clark is still out there and he's alive. Now, all these episodes have been titled Part 1, Part 2 through the rest of the show, but I'm going to start giving titles to these episodes, and I'm going to give this Part 2 episode the title of What Lies Beneath the Innis. Now, that can go two ways. What lies beneath the ice? How old is the ice? Does it tie into these symbols? But also the lies that all these people keep within this town. As it's starting to look like all the she's awake from last week was referring to Annie. Now, was she brought back due to witchcraft, or was it tied into the Yellow King or Blue King? Was he able to bring her back, and in a form of rage and revenge, this spiritual supernatural entity killed all the scientists? Or maybe this has to do with the town's legend with the woman with the missing eyes and the missing fingers. Or again, this can be grounded in reality and we have a killer at hand. And it's Clark. Now, finishing up this video, I want to highlight a couple things. One being my favorite scene was the conversation between Liz and Peter discussing the crime and figuring things out and asking the right question. Now, my creepy and scared moment of the week definitely has to be the opening scene when we find out that Lund was alive. And I gotta say, as far as one of my favorite characters throughout this episode was seeing the growth and seeing the continuation of Peter becoming a better police officer. And my crazy theory of the week right now has to be Annie and Clark have created something unearthly. And my major moment of the week definitely has to be the reveal between the connections of season 1 and this season, with Travis being revealed to be the dad of Russ, and also the connections to the spirals. So overall, I really enjoyed the character development in this episode and the continuation of getting the backstories and the secrets kept from one another. And the whole what's spiritual and supernatural elements of the story is very fascinating. And again, the whole idea of all these events can be grounded in reality. Again, these people not sleeping or blaming the town's superstition around the dead. But I'm in the camp that the supernatural is very much going to play into the story. Now, if you're still watching this video at this point, I want to thank you all. You are the true MVPs. Do me a favor and put a spiral in the comments. And make sure to join me same place, same time next week for part 3. But that's going to be the end of this video. Again, thank you all for watching. Make sure to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Come and join me live to have our after show about this episode. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.